Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butz, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Danone North America, the world's largest B Corp, committed to doing all kinds of better for people and the planet. Learn more at DanoneAwayFromHome.com.
Hi there, I'm Yom, host of Item 13, an African food podcast. I am excited to be joining the Heritage Radio Network this year as we kick off our 4th season of the podcast. On Item 13, we cover all aspects of the African food ecosystem. You will hear West Africans squabble over who has the best jollof. Newsflash, it's Ghana.
It's time to celebrate our jollof. Like, we're done with comparing who and who did what. And jollof is not just about even the rice, it's about the protein that goes with it.
Guests share their expertise on African food ingredients and spices.
This is a region where, even if you look at 18th century maps, you had something called the Pepper Coast. Fresh and aromatic peppers. That is what distinguishes West Africa.
Tips on marketing food businesses.
A good way to engage your audience is to take them on that journey. Get them talking about this idea you have. That way you're engaging them, they're engaging with each other, and you're getting useful insights that you can then pull from and use to develop your recipe.
This season, my goal is to focus on more stories outside of English-speaking West Africa. So you'll hear stories from Benin, from Uganda, Liberia, and even Haiti. You will also hear us discuss the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement and how COVID-19 has impacted some of the businesses featured on the show. You can catch up now on previous episodes of Item 13, wherever you listen to podcasts, and join us this season as we debut on HRN. Thank you.
Well, hello. Welcome to All in the Industry on Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Sherry Bayer, and it is Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. This is the 266th episode of this series, which is dedicated to behind-the-scenes talent in the hospitality industry. Today, my guest is an award-winning chef and restaurateur from the West Coast who has a brand new podcast, and I will introduce him fully in a moment. First, as I do on every show, I will start out with my PR tip, and then later we will have my speed round game, industry news discussion, solo dining experience, and the final question. As the founder of Bayer Public Relations, I'm going to tip the show off with my PR tip of the week. So today's tip is to practice patience and understanding, especially in this uncertain time of COVID. Let's remember that we are in a really difficult period that is challenging for all of us, and perhaps some more than others, due to work, family, health, finances, and just life. It's important to have extra tolerance and show kindness as we go about our lives to make the most and the best of every day. They say patience is a virtue, so let's practice it. That's my tip today. Now, I'm thrilled to have my guest joining me. It is David Nayfeld. He is the executive chef and co-owner of the award-winning restaurants Fico and Fico Alimentari in San Francisco, California. A Bay Area native and graduate from the Culinary Institute of America, David has worked alongside some of the most esteemed names in the industry. Among his accolades in 2018, Fico was named one of Bon Appetit's top 10 best new restaurants in America, as well as one of Esquire magazine's best new restaurants. David recently began co-hosting a new podcast called The Main Ingredient, which takes a deep dive with some favorite artists, chefs, musicians, actors, and producers. Without further ado, welcome to the show. Hi, David.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Sherry.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you and chat everything that's going on with you. There's a lot happening. I always like to start with my guests and find out a bit about their background and just how you got into the industry and what led you into the profession of being a chef.
Yeah, sure. I'll try and keep it brief because, I know probably you want to get into more stuff than just my bio. But, I think for me, it was very accidental. When I was 13 years old, I needed to get out of the house and earn my own money. And that was just, I came from immigrant background, and my family are all refugees from the former USSR. I was born here, and I was the first person in my family to be born here. But essentially, my house was, a very kind of immigrant mentality. And, just the feeling of wanting to be self-sufficient and not depending on anyone else. So I got a job in a produce stand, stocking produce and doing stuff like that. And strangely enough, that led me to a second job, washing dishes in a Greek Italian cafe. And it kind of just kept rolling from there. And I didn't really view it as being a potential profession until I was probably like 16 or 17. And, at that time, it wasn't very posh or in vogue or popular to go to culinary school or to, they also weren't as proliferated as they are now.
Right.
And, I wanted to be, I had an insecurity about it, frankly, about, going to culinary school and becoming a chef because, at that time it was synonymous with kind of like, being a burnout, not being able to go get into college, doing any of those things. But it was truly like one of the few places on the planet that made sense to me when I was in the kitchen. Everything made sense. The meritocracy of it made sense. The intensity of it made sense. Everything kind of just slowed down and was really clear to me the way it wasn't in like a classroom. And so for me, that insecurity led me to wanting to seek out what the best culinary school in the world was. And, my research showed that it was in New York and Hyde Park. And so, I applied there. And at that time, the prerequisite was to have some experience before, which actually worked quite perfectly for me. And I ended up going to school there. And that was kind of the rest is history. And, I've been working in restaurants ever since, my entire life.
Yeah. Well, what year were you at the CIA? When is this about?
I think 2003, 2002, 2003, around that time.
Yeah, no, I'm always impressed when that's on people's resume that they went there. A little fact about me is I moved to Chicago after college, and I had a moment where I thought I wanted to be a chef, and I started looking around at culinary schools, and I ended up doing a 6-month program at the Cooking Academy of Chicago, which doesn't exist anymore. But it was, I was just thinking like that was back in '96, and it was a different time with schools and just the perception of wanting to cook for a living. And then I ended up, going on a different path or just finally finding my way to PR. But I love that I had that experience. And looking at places I feel I saw in your longer bio that you've worked at. I mean, you went over to Europe and you got a lot of experience at amazing restaurants that I've been fortunate to dine at, but I can't imagine what it's like to work at. So was that what led you? When did you go after culinary school to Europe, or what kind of transpired for you then?
So while I was in culinary school, I really wanted to be maximizing my time. So I took the opportunity to go to the city every time I could, and basically got I guess you would call it like a very extended stage position at Nobu in Tribeca, which was, at that time, Nobu was considered to be probably one of the better restaurants in New York, if not in the country. There was only one Nobu at that time. It was in Tribeca. It wasn't like this multi-unit kind of multinational brand. And Nobu was a trailblazer in terms of the United States and bringing that experience of working in Peru and Japanese kind of skill set and technique to the table. And, on the New York landscape and in Los Angeles, where he had Matsuhisa, it was just explosive and super exciting. And from there, I got a position at Aqua in San Francisco, which at that time was considered to be one of the premier seafood restaurants in the country. And it was iconic there for a very long time. That's where Michael Mina got his start at. And then there was a chef, Laurent Manrique, George Marone opened it. It's an iconic restaurant. It's now where Michael Mina's flagship restaurant is in San Francisco. And I got to work there for a number of years. And then, there became a lot of murmurings around Joel Robuchon opening in the United States. And that was something that was super interesting, I think, to American cooks, the prospect of being able to work for someone like that with that cachet. That, at that time, it was very challenging to go to Europe and just get a job. It wasn't like it had been maybe more in the 90s, because unemployment in Europe was skyrocketing. So it was very challenging to get any sort of work permit to go there. So to get there, you either needed to have a connection, or you just really needed to fly by the seat of your pants and just show up there and hope that somebody would let you in. And that was very sketchy. That was a challenging thing to do. So I had moved all my stuff to Vegas on the hopes that I was going to get a job at Joel Robuchon, and I ended up and got to open that restaurant, which became a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And it was insanely good. They gave me the opportunity to travel to Paris to go work at their outlet there. And that was very special. And I got to go work there for a short period of time, and then came back to the United States. And then moved back to New York, where I worked at a restaurant called Crew, which is no longer there. But, in terms of restaurateurs like Robert Bohr, who's, in my mind, he's one of the, I think Robert Bohr is like one of the best American restaurateurs of kind of our generation. He just has that get it factor when it comes to hospitality and really knowing what guests want. And there was a chef there, Shea Galante, who came from like the Boulay camp, and he was the chef at Boulay for, during the time that they got 4 stars. So it was a very, it was a very interesting restaurant. There was a lot of really amazing things going on there, but ultimately it wasn't the right fit for me culturally. And I got an opportunity to go become the sous chef at 11 Madison Park. And this was before a lot of the awards and accolades. And, there was an amazing team there. And it's just when you walked in the kitchen, you could sense something really exciting was happening. It wasn't because it was, the writing wasn't in the papers, it wasn't kind of these accolades. But when you walked in the kitchen, you just got a sense of what was happening there. There was this distinct buzz around you. Just people knew what they were working on was something special. And I was enthralled, and everything about that space spoke to me. The kitchen culture, the food, the camaraderie, the intensity, the challenge. Working there was very much akin to trying to, be successful in athletics. It was very much about training your mind and training yourself and constantly trying to get better and getting constant feedback. And that was something that I thrived in. So I got to work there for a number of years, and that was really terrific. I would probably say that was the best work experience of my lifetime in terms of really gearing me up for what it would take to be successful in the industry. And from there, I had met a significant amount of amazing chefs and people from all over the world, whether it was Mauro Colagreco from Mirazur doing dinners together, or, we got to do, dinners with Christopher Costow and the Meadowwood team. We got to do dinners with Yannick Aleno. We got to do, it was truly special. So when I left there, after a number of years and really kind of sinking my teeth into that position, I think that was the moment where I knew that if I wanted to go to Europe, I would be welcomed there. And that was the case. And I think that was actually a really good thing, because had I gone when I was just a young cook, the truth is you probably would just be sitting there picking herbs and putting away produce in people's walk-ins, which is, by the way, like super key to your education, but you don't need to be in Europe to do that. You can be at a great American restaurant to do that, right? Like, I think if you're going to go abroad, it should be to be learning different things, different flavor profiles, different techniques, seeing different kitchen setups, learning different languages. And I think that is best done when you already have some experience under your wing, because then you become an asset to whoever you're visiting rather than just someone that's in the way. And so I got to spend a year in Europe kind of just hanging out with, some people that I thought were truly spectacular and really, really special talents. And I got to see a huge gamut, right? Like, I got to spend some time in La Crillon in the kitchen there, which was one end of the super luxurious spectrum, and also at Le Pont-de-Bran in Switzerland with, then it was Benoit Violet, rest his soul, which, obviously is an iconic restaurant. And then I got to see the opposite spectrum of just like super kind of gritty Parisian bistros that were just, honestly, they were hole in the walls that people came in and kind of put some new curtains on and sanded some tables and basically made the best of the space with incredible ingredients. And I got to see all the different kind of things in between there. Going to Mirazur, to the south of France and Menton, and, waking up to the ocean smell and the ocean sound. And you'd go out into the garden while it was still dark to pick herbs and flowers before the sun would start to kind of wilt them. And the fishermen would bring in, sometimes 14, 15 different varieties of catch to the restaurant straight from the water by 7 o'clock in the morning. And you'd pick all that, and all of that needed to be on the lunch menu, and you need to get it ready and prepare it. And everything was a la minute, and you wouldn't even cut your vegetables sometimes until they were ordered in. And that was a spectacular experience. So I think, all in all, that's kind of brought me to where I am today.
Wow. I mean, so much amazing experience. My last trip to Europe was to go dine at Mirazur. I went with a friend in December, and it was unbelievable. It was one of those places I always wanted to go to. So I mean, it's really special. But it is a special restaurant. Yeah, really incredible and beautiful. The most beautiful setting of a Michelin star restaurant I've been to. So what inspired you? What led you to Fico? Because now I haven't been, because the last time I was in San Francisco, I don't think you weren't open yet. I think I was there in 2017. So I'm dying to go or experience, but what inspired that concept? Because it's Italian, it's a little different than these fine dining places that you worked.
Yeah, so I mean, really, the impetus behind Fico was a couple of things. Number one, first and foremost, I think ultimately I wanted to make food that I wanted to eat. And I think that I really came to that mindset when I was in Europe. I had left 11 Madison Park, and I was so, bought in. I drank every ounce of Kool-Aid there was about that experience, and about, constantly pushing the boundaries and everything like that. And I think through my time of seeing the gastronomy of Paris and seeing the cool little neighborhood restaurants in Barcelona and the trattorias in Rome and things like that. I think I started to recognize, what was it that I was trying to do and what was making me happy. And the truth is, it was honestly making me happy when I was happiest, when I was cooking food that I wanted to eat and I wanted to eat often. And the idea of a neighborhood restaurant was really something that I just couldn't get out of my head. I wanted to be a part of a community in a real way, and not just like tangentially or physically, but like really a part of a community where the community kind of opened up within my space, within the dining room. And, I think that led me to a very long search for a space. I saw dozens. And when I say dozens, I mean 50, 60 spaces between Los Angeles and here. And finally, I walked into an old auto body shop and I looked around and I said, this is where I want to open my restaurant. This is my dream. And the landlord, honestly, he knew I didn't have any money at that time. He just believed in me. He believed in my idea. And secondly, there's another reason why I wanted to open this concept, because the truth is, I think that there's a lot of chefs within my generation, probably, and I think also to a greater extent, the generation kind of that's coming behind us, that forget the virtue of being a savvy business person. And the truth is, like, I wanted to open a successful business. And that was the first thing I wanted to prove. I had proven already that I could work at the highest levels of gastronomy. And I had proven that I could work in fine dining. And the truth is, like, it doesn't really take a lot, by the way, to go and do something that is in a lot of ways, almost like regurgitating the things that you've already seen, and in a lot of ways they're copies of a copy, right? It's very rare for a restaurant like Noma or a restaurant like 11 Madison Park or a restaurant like Danielle or a restaurant like, Mirazur to exist, Favakin, right? Like, these are once in a generation restaurants. And then for every one of those, you have about 100 other restaurants which feel like copies of a copy. And I think that if you're not really going to have something that you want to speak on in that genre of restaurant, then it's best not to get involved. And I think a lot of people like me work their entire career in fine dining and then feel like they're obligated to do fine dining because that was their entire experience. And the truth is, at that time, I don't think I had enough to say that was unique enough that, and in a lot of ways, I think what I would have just been doing was doing something that was, some sort of derivative from 11 Madison Park, right? And not that that's a bad thing, but that's really where I would have pulled from. And I think for me, I wanted to prove that I could be a smart and shrewd business person on my own. I wanted to do something that the neighborhood would appreciate for a long time to come. And, honestly, for me, eating pasta and making pasta was probably one of the most gratifying things that I was doing at the time. I think I've come to a place over the, and keep in mind, I started the process to open Fico around 5 years ago at this point, if not longer. And with my business partner, Matt Brewer. And, I think over that time, I've started to distill an idea of what I would do if I did fine dining again. And I'm not saying that that's out of the cards for me. Like, I certainly have thought about it. And, one day there may be that moment that feels right. But Fico in its current iteration and what we're doing here is what felt right for me at the time. And I think I was, validated in my choice, considering the fact that, we were constantly full. We were on a schedule to pay our investors back in record time. We were, doing business in arguably the hardest market to do business in the United States in terms of the lowest margins ever in a business that is inherently low margin. And we were still being successful. And I think that validated everything I needed to validate in terms of being able to be a shrewd business person and not just an artist, right? Because I do consider myself an artist as well. And I think that sometimes we really need to recognize those paths between, art and commerce and how they coalesce, but also letting each one have their due.
Yeah. And you received accolades, many accolades for your restaurant, and we met at the Hot 10 Bon Appetit party. It was wonderful to meet you and your pastry chef, Angela Pinkerton there. And so I'm glad I got a little taste of what you were doing. Let me ask you my question from my last guest. I had on episode 265, Dale DeGroff, who's known as King Cocktail. He has a new book out, The New Craft of the Cocktail, Everything You Need to Know to Think Like a Master Mixologist. So he wants to know, at Fico on your menu, do you have any of the foods from Calabria, the Southern Italian cuisine that we all love so much, like soppressata he named, and he said his mom's side of the family is from that region.
Yeah, so we certainly do, and it's funny that he specifically called out some salumi like soppressata. Yeah. And it's funny also because if you were to travel through Italy and ask for soppressata in about a dozen different regions, you'd see a dozen different things that look differently. And that's kind of I think that's Italy in a nutshell. But yes, we do have quite a few things from Calabria. It's one of my favorite regions to cook from. My favorite ingredient from the Calabrian region that we have fallen in love with, that I believe we make quite well, is andouille. And that's a spicy spreadable salami, which, it has a higher fat content to it. So it never fully forms. And after it goes through its acidification process and it goes through its aging process, it stays in this spreadable form. And it is truly one of the delights of the region. And I think it's one of the best things that we make. We put it in pasta preparations. We serve it just in its kind of raw state to spread on freshly grilled, Levain bread, which we bake here. We've put it on pizzas before. We've given it out as gifts. We think that, that as an ingredient is one of our favorite things to work with.
Wow. Now I'm hungry. Well, yeah, I'm glad he asked that question. And let's talk, we'll wait for the industry news part of the show. We'll talk a little about what's happening now with COVID and your businesses, because that will tie in well there. Why don't we talk a bit now about your podcast? Because I've now listened to two of them. The Main Ingredient, I listened to your show first with Dominique Crenn, and I listened to the show with your Panettone friend. It was
Roy Schwartzapfel.
Yes. I mean, wonderful interviews, and I really got a lot out of it. Tell me what inspired you to want to do a podcast, and the the format, and what you're hoping to get out of it.
I think ultimately why I started it was because I was becoming frustrated with the discourse in the world. And I felt like there was, there's been a constantly shrinking space for nuanced conversation, for conversation that is not, all in all, I guess you would say PC, or, it is not, it's not like signaling to one end of a spectrum or another. It kind of resides soundly in the middle and kind of treads around there. This idea of having a conflicted opinion, even within yourself, right? And that being okay. I think we're living in a time where people need to go check Twitter to find out how they feel about something. And that's really concerning to me, because I think that in a world where there is so much information out there and your access to information is greater than it ever has been before. And yes, some of that information can be false and some of the information can be good, and it has to be up to you to find it. But you would think that in that time that we have all of this information, this would be the best time in the world to just learn how to decipher information and make up your mind. And I think that we have gotten lazier, actually, and our ability to process information and seek it out has become lazier, and everything is about clickbait and headlines, and people will read a headline of something and not even read the meat of the journal of the of the article. And I know over the past 7 months, I've now published 2 op-eds, and the one thing that I can tell you about an op-ed or about about an article is they're called op-eds for a reason, because it's your opinion, right? And B, most of the time you don't choose your own byline. That is chosen by an editor who needs to get a certain amount of clicks or a certain amount of shares on an article, right? And so I can tell you, even with my 2 articles that I wrote, I offered 2 bylines which I thought were very accurate to what I was trying to write about, and they got changed to suit what the editor's needs were, right? And even looking at them, sometimes I was like, I'm not really sure that embodies what I'm trying to say here. And so I think that we have gotten lazier in terms of finding information, and I also really started to get slightly frustrated with the idea of being taken out of context. And that didn't happen to me a tremendous amount of times. And it also I don't want to act like there was something that happened that was like so vicious that it sent me down this like path. But I just started to notice a trend, right? That every time I spoke with a journalist, sometimes I would spend an hour on the phone with them, and I would get 2 sentences of that hour into an article in which they would clump us in with 4 other people. And they would oftentimes take the 2 sentences that meant the least, and that really, really didn't, it didn't get to the meat of the bone of what we're talking about. And I think that that's what I wanted to change. I wanted to change the fact that everyone else, in terms of, whether it's media, whether it's, TV, whether it's, print, whatever it is, they had the keys to telling the story of the people like me and the other people in the industry and my other colleagues who really should be telling their own stories. And I think that was something that, like, I think is the real reason why I wanted to have conversations with people that were pretty full and unvarnished and not overly edited. And I think that people really appreciated that. And that's why, we've been able to book a bunch of really cool guests so far.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's having a platform and having little, control, or being able to have these conversations. And I have to say, though, your op-ed pieces were really great. I know the one with Business Insider with Larissa Zimberoff, who's a colleague and friend. It really, really struck a chord with the industry, and to get your voice out there. And I think it's wonderful that you now have this podcast to get your voice and the voice of your colleagues and fellow. I mean, it's not just chefs. It's, you're covering a spectrum of different, I guess, beats in the world. And what I've listened to so far has been really, it's grabbed me. It's been really well done. I love how you tied music into the show. And I also have to say the main ingredient, what I want to call it, the sound, the music for it, gets
the
stuck
theme
in
music
my head a lot.
Yeah.
What's your theme music?
Yeah, that was actually done by my childhood best friend, who's also my co-host and producer. His name's Manny J. He's a musical engineer and a musical producer. He makes his own music, and that's actually his voice on our theme music. And he, believe it or not, he banged that out in one day, because I told him exactly the vibe that I was going for. I was like, hey, you know this song or this genre of songs that we used to listen to in this moment? And he's like, yep, I got it. I'll come right back to you. And he was able to get it done so beautifully, and I never get sick of hearing it. I totally agree with you. It does get stuck in your head in the best of ways.
It really does. I mean, it's very catchy. So job well done across all aspects. And I look forward to listening more. Who are some of your guests you have coming up?
So we just, as you said, we just published Roy Schwartzapfel yesterday, and that's out now. And previously we did Dominique Crenn, who is an incredible friend, and she's an incredible chef with a great story. In between that, we had a really great musician. His name's Adrian Marcel, who is, he's a platinum record selling musician from here in Oakland. And I felt like that conversation was very important. And I really enjoyed that one as well. We are going to be having coming up Tanya Holland, who's the chef of Brown Sugar Kitchen, another Bay Area native. We have a DJ named Big Von, who's been a DJ in the Bay Area on the radio, on the hip hop stations for about 20 something years. And anyone that's from here that grew up listening to the radio here has heard his voice, and he's been a super pivotal, I think, personality and voice for the culture here. We also have Gwyneth Paltrow, who we recorded with, and that's going to be coming soon as well. I feel like I'm forgetting someone else, but we have a number of really great guests coming up.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you launched your own podcast. I think it's great, and I look forward to listening more. We are going to take a little break here, and we'll come back. We'll play my speed round game. We'll talk industry news. We'll have my solo dining experience in the final question. So stay with us. This is All in the Industry on Heritage Radio Network. Every time your customers eat and drink, they vote for the world they want to live in. And as the world's largest B Corp, Danone North America helps people vote for a better world with all kinds of better dairy, coffee, and plant-based products sourced and produced transparently. Danone North America has the brands people know and love, like International Delight, Oikos, Silk, So Delicious Dairy Free, Horizon Organic, and Stoke Cold Brew Coffee. But Danone North America represents more than just in-demand brands and better-for-your-business products. They bring their B Corp certification to life in ways that protect the environment and communities by utilizing 100% renewable electricity sources to produce their products at their manufacturing facilities, committing $6 million to programs that restore the soil's ability to capture and sequester carbon, helping to restore more than 7.8 billion gallons to freshwater ecosystems through their water partnerships over the past decade, and committing to 100% reusable, recyclable, and compostable packaging by 2025. Learn how you can choose better at DanoneAwayFromHome.com. Welcome back to All in the Industry on Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Sherry Bayer. My guest today is David Nayfeld. He is the executive chef and co-owner of Fico and Fico Alimentari in San Francisco. He's also the co-host of a new podcast called The Main Ingredient. So, David, it's time for my speed round game. What this is I'm going to name a couple of things, and you get to pick your preference, such as chocolate or vanilla. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Figured you're always ready. Okay, here we go. Eat in or eat out?
Eat out.
Wine, beer, cocktail, mocktail, or champagne?
Liquor.
That's a first. I think it's a first. I love it. Okay. Tasting menu or a la carte?
A la carte.
Small plates or large plates?
Large plates.
Communal table or chef's counter?
Chef's counter.
Tipping or all-inclusive charge?
All-inclusive.
Hosting a podcast or being a guest on a podcast?
Hosting.
Okay. Gwyneth Paltrow, the actress, or lifestyle brand entrepreneur with Goop?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
As I stump you on that one.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I've gotten to know her as Gwyneth Paltrow, the person, honestly.
Okay. Fair.
And I just kind of would like to say that as Gwyneth Paltrow, the person, she's actually a pretty exceptional person, and she's been really special. So, like, I mean, I've to be honest with you, I've been a fan of her as an actress for forever, and I think she has been incredible in a lot of movies. So I'll say the actress.
Awesome. Okay, I have two more. Cheese plate or dessert?
Cheese plate.
Manhattan, Brooklyn, or San Francisco?
Oh man. Yeah. So you're striking a chord with me because San Francisco is home to me 100%, and I love it here, and I would choose it over anywhere else. But I'm feeling a little bit bent out of shape with the way our city has treated us, not just us as a restaurant, but like us as an industry, us as a public, and but I'm gonna stay with San Francisco.
Okay. Well, there you have it. That's the game. You were fast, speedy. So let's talk some industry news. In the New York Times yesterday, or today's paper, it came out online yesterday, there was an article, New York dining is moving indoors. How nervous should you be? As dining rooms reopen, doctors, engineers, and other experts assess the health risks and how restaurants can reduce them. And this was by Pete Wells, the reviewer for the New York Times. So today is the day. Today is the day that New York City restaurants open or can open for indoor 25% capacity in restaurants. We've had outdoor dining going on here for a little while. So it's it's interesting. There's his article. He's pointing out there's fears in it. There's some people on board. I mean, I happened to see that the COVID numbers in New York went up to 3% it was down from 1%. So there's concerns about this. But what's happening, David? What's happening in San Francisco with indoor dining, outdoor dining, and the status of your restaurants right now?
So sorry, is the question about the article or is the question about San Francisco?
Well, both. I thought we could tie it in together. Like,
sure.
Yeah. I mean, no, I mean, what are your thoughts on the article? And I was just curious with this talk of fears of dining out in New York, what the word is generally, over in your city.
It's hard for me to answer that without getting into a broader, topic that, maybe it's something I should discuss at a different time. But, I've been very disappointed with food journalism and the folks involved with it over the past couple of years. And during COVID, I think it's become more so than before. I think that there's been a lot of things written that are honestly, like I said, it's clickbait. And there's a lot of things that people, are drumming up either fears or stoking, flames of people's, whether it's, their inner kind of pitchfork or whatever it is. And the truth is, I think that, what I had hoped would happen during this time is that food media would stop and recognize the fact that, without chefs and restaurants and without the people that work inside of those restaurants, food media would not have much to talk about. They wouldn't have much to write about. And frankly, they wouldn't have jobs. And I think that, unfortunately, what I've seen is a lot of things that does not take into account, how to, in a really productive manner, help restaurants do things well. And instead it is about like, hey, let's watch this person walking a tightrope. And while they're walking the tightrope, let's sit there in the cheap seats kind of talking about like, oh man, if they fall, this is going to be real bad. Let's get your camera out. Like, let's see what happens when they fall. And then even to the point where you're trying to distract them and hey, like, And I think that is something that has overwhelmingly disappointed me and a number of my colleagues during this time. So without kind of parsing that too much, I'll get into your other question.
No,
You
but
know,
I'm glad you said all that. You know, I think it's important to hear.
Yeah. And so without, getting into the other, getting into your actual question is, the truth is I have paid close attention to what's going on in San Francisco and some other markets, but I believe that there needs to be a little bit, and this goes back to the thing about why I wanted to have a podcast, right? I believe there needs to be a little bit more of a measured conversation in which we start discussing things in contrast, right? And one of the things that I think people have been overwhelmingly afraid to do, depending on where you are, is to either say, hey, there is a place for science in this conversation and medicine. And then there's also a place for economy in this conversation. And I think that if you're in a place that's overwhelmingly, we'll use the color codes, right? If you're in a place where it's overwhelmingly red, it is not okay to bring up science and medical realities, right? And if you're in a place that's overwhelmingly blue, it is not okay to talk about the economy. It's insensitive. And the truth is, it falls somewhere in the middle, and depending on where you are in your science, it's somewhere, and that's a varying degree of the middle. So about New York, I don't know enough about what's happening there, because I know that they had a really, really challenging time up front, and they really, I applaud the folks there for hunkering down and doing what they needed to do. Here in San Francisco, we shut down before anyone else in the country. Our restaurant shut down before, the city even mandated it. And we've been shut for 7 months. Our numbers have never really been very high at all. And we are also just have announced that the city is able to open to 25% dining. And we have been very slow. And when I say we, I mean my business partner, Matt Brewer, and I have been very slow to do anything besides closing, right? We were very quick to close because, we felt like it was in the best interest of the guests and our team during that time, because we didn't know what was happening, and just not being sure was not a place where we felt comfortable operating. And so where that leaves us today is I don't think that we will open to 25% for a number of reasons. Number one is financially, it just doesn't make sense for us. There's not a way in which we open to 25% that we even break even. And I think what we're doing downstairs at Fico Alimentari with our to-go program, what we've done with the Fico family meal program, with our newly built outdoor seating, with our packaged foods, we've created pasta kits. We've created this beautifully branded, pasta sauces and things like gianduja and Calabrian chili bamba. All of those things I think have become really popular and have allowed us to kind of barely stay afloat. Now, we're not making any money, and we've lost a tremendous amount of money during this process. But I think we'd rather focus in on that and just try and make that successful and see what happens, and see what happens with the science and see what happens with everything else. The main thing that I want to point out, and this is if anyone takes anything from this podcast, I hope they take this one thing away, because right now there's nothing more important than this, that the only way our industry makes it through this at all, and I'm talking about there's already been a significant amount of closures, but the only way we make it through this in any way is not 25% dining, and it's not 50% dining. It's not even 75% dining. It is the Restaurants Act, full stop. And right now, the House and Nancy Pelosi and we have over 200 co-signatories in the House and over 41 co-signatories in the Senate. So the House has wrapped it up into their new HEROES Act, which is a $2.2 trillion bill. They came down from $3 trillion, and they made room for the entire Restaurants Act, which me and countless other restaurateurs, chefs, and operators have gotten on the phone every single morning for the past 6 months to fight for and lobby for and get on the phone with. Sometimes there was weeks where I'd speak to 15 different congressional members or their offices, right? And constantly hammering away at this. If the Restaurant Act doesn't get passed in some form or facet, whether it's through the HEROES Act, whether it's as an individual bill, and right now it is going to be taken up for a vote as the HEROES Act, we will not survive, and other restaurants will not survive. And you will see a massive closure, the likes of which this country has never, ever seen. And the only beneficiaries of that are going to be big box retail. So if you are, one of those people who you're like, hey, look, for me, like all I care about is having a Jamba Juice, a McDonald's, a Chipotle, and those things around me, then that's fine for you, because those are the people who are going to come in and take these leases. But at the end of the day, if you are someone that values your independent restaurants, you need to call Congress now and ask them to act, and then you need to call the Senate and specifically, call your local representative and let them know that you expect them to support the Restaurants Act.
Yes to all of that. I mean, I'm so glad you said everything you did, and the work that you've been doing and with the chefs and the restaurateurs with the Independent Restaurant Coalition is amazing. And that I commend you for your work. And I hope yes, it needs to pass, and we need to save restaurants. So much more we could talk about, dive into that, but starting to run out of time. So I'm going to go into my solo dining experience, which this week, I was going to talk about going to Gramercy Tavern, but I'm going to hold that to next week because I wanted to talk about my experience going to the restaurant at Meadowood, because that was the other article in the news I had picked out, which is tragic news about how the restaurant is, a couple days ago, it was just all over social media. It was burnt down by some glass fires spread in the Napa Valley region. So I just wanted to share this as a special experience I had there. So here's my rundown. The location, 900 Meadowood Lane, St. Helena, California. The concept, a 3-star Michelin restaurant, modern American cuisine in the heart of Napa Valley. The chef and owner, Christopher Costow, who's received many accolades, including Food and Wine magazine's Best New Chefs in 2009 and James Beard Award for Best Chef Pacific in 2013. So why did I go? So my experience I'm talking about was on July 26, 2014. It was when I had flown across the country by myself to go eat at the French Laundry, and I just went all out, and also went to Meadowood. And I talked about the French Laundry experience on episode 29. So why am I talking about it? Well, because devastating news struck earlier this week. As I said, there was a glass fire, which tragically damaged the restaurant. And my heart goes out to the chef, Christopher, and his wife, Martina, and the whole tramily, as they call it. And I just wanted to commemorate the experience. So, or commemorate them. My experience. So it was really magical. I drove up, it was just gorgeous Napa Valley with all the greenery in the woods. And I just remember as soon as I got to the front, I was just so warmly greeted. I have to say the hospitality of this dining experience was by far the best hospitality I've ever received at a restaurant. And I dine out a lot. So that says a lot. I sat at the bar, I ate there, I chatted with the manager, and I just had a really wonderful experience. I got a tour of the kitchen, and I left happy. So what did I get? I did their 3-course menu instead of the full course menu, which you get at the bar. There were a few small bites. There was the dishes included a heavenly potato dish. There was a savory duck. There was a Wagyu beef. There were 2 desserts. One was a creamy yogurt with olive oil, and I also got some fancy pour-over coffee. My take, it was divine from start to finish. The ambiance, it's a serene, elegant, and handsome space. It has the warmth of fireplaces throughout. I'd say it's perfect for a special occasion or a reason to dress up. Interesting tidbit, the restaurant is located in Meadowood, Napa Valley's 20-acre private estate with lodging and robust collection of amenities. And Christopher Costow also has a casual restaurant called the Charter Oak, and his newest place is Ensu in China. Personal fun fact. So before this dinner, I treated myself to my first mud bath that I've ever had, and a massage up at Indian Springs in Calistoga. So I was like I was really chill at this dinner. And I probably had the softest skin I've ever had as well. And also, personal fun fact, I've been back to the restaurant twice in 2016 and 2017 when I was at the CIA's Worlds of Flavor conference. We went there afterward with a bunch of the other presenters to have some snacks. And again, it was wonderful. So the cost of my meal was $130, not including tax and gratuity. Would I go back? Yes, I hope so. I hope they can rebuild. I think they are planning to. My heart goes out to them. It's really tragic. And it was all over, my social media feed. Just everyone loves this restaurant for very good reasons and the people behind it. So their website's therestaurantmeadowood.com. So there we go. You had mentioned, David, working with Christopher Costello earlier, or collaborating?
Yeah, so, Christopher Costello worked for Daniel Hume at Campton Place here in San Francisco, and they've, always obviously kept in touch. And, when he had, went to become the chef at Meadowood, we had done multiple collaboration dinners with them and their team in New York at 11 Madison Park. And, we had gotten to know each other, and, he's just a tremendous talent. And one thing that I do want to say about Meadowood is, I think our fine dining institutions in this country have taken a bit of a culture hit because they are deemed to be places where, only the 1% can dine. And one thing that I want to push back on is, I've never grown up with any money. I still don't have any money. My parents came here as refugees. Eating fine dining meals was not in our budget. But I will tell you that working in fine dining restaurants has been, for me, a higher education, right? And it is the idea of, whether you go to culinary school or not. And trust me, there was a significant amount of people that I worked with that never went to culinary school. Working in a fine dining restaurant like Meadowood or 11 Madison Park or Joel Robuchon is the equivalency to getting a master's degree in whatever you're doing or a doctorate in whatever you're doing. And I think that these institutions are important to protect, and they're important to, to hold up in a certain regard, in the sense that the amount of people that come through those doors who work tirelessly to build something special and who learn skills that they then take on and open restaurants like Fico, or open, your favorite local restaurant, that is this small little wine bar, charming wine bar, whatever it is. They take those skills from those restaurants and they apply them to everyday work, which I think, in a lot of ways ends up feeding into a much more accessible dining experience, right? And I think people think that it is just one of those places where it's all about the haves and have-nots, and people don't recognize the amount of work that places like that also do for charity, the amount of fundraising they do for charity, the amount of things that they do that are beyond just, profiteering as a restaurant. And I hope that Meadowood rebuilds, because what they were doing there, similar to, what restaurants like Single Thread have done, and the French Laundry, and, Stone Barns, or whatever it is, right?
I can throw in Charlie Trotter's into the mix, because I worked there back. Yeah. Then that's still, I hold so much value in that experience with everything you're saying.
Right. And, I think I would just hope that, I think that it has become very popular to demonize restaurants like that. And I think people need to pump their brakes slightly, because those places have acted as the centers for opportunity for a lot of people who did not come from money, to build lives for themselves. And, we have put in those places on our resumes, and then we have learned whatever we could learn, and then gone off and trained other people and taught other people those skills. And I think that without places like that, without people like Christopher Costello, without people, like, the folks who swing at the highest levels to try and do things at the most pristine levels, our cuisine as a country would not be where it's at today. And we would not have the culture of dining that we do have today if it weren't those people at the highest level. So to everyone who's ever worked at the restaurant at Meadowood, my heart goes out to you, to Christopher Costa and his family and everyone there. I hope that you rebuild, and I thank you for everything that you've done for our industry. And I truly, truly hope that people start to recognize that, just because a place has 3 Michelin stars, just because it is too expensive for you to eat at, even once a year, it does not mean that it doesn't have a place in our industry. They are iconic for a reason. And, in a lot of ways, I think that they push the needle, they push the needle and they move the needle on where our cuisine is as a country, more so than you may think.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's certainly special. They're special. And as we both said, our heart goes out to them. And so let's wrap up the show now with my final question. So my next guests are Greg and Darren Bresnitz. They are the twin brother duo behind Snacky Tunes podcast here on Heritage Radio. And they have a new book coming out called Snacky Tunes, Music is the Main Ingredient. Chefs and their music. I got stuck on that. Is the main ingredient. Chefs and their music. David, can you please ask a question for Greg and Darren?
Yeah, that's amazing, because obviously my podcast is called The Main Ingredient with David Nayfeld. I think that there is a lot of parallels between becoming a chef and becoming a musician. I think obviously a lot of it depends on what your accessibility is and what your talent level is for any of those things. But I think that the mindset of the people who get into those industries, there are a lot of parallels, and the people who kind of thrive in those industries, there's a lot of parallels. So I guess my question is, what's on your playlist right now?
Oh, that's a good one. I'll find out. Yeah. So funny. This all ties in together with the main ingredient. I love it. So that's the show. I wish we had more time to talk about, everything that you're doing with, it's tremendous, but we did cover a lot. So, I just want to wish you much continued success, and I will keep listening to your show, and I hope to get out to San Francisco one of these days and further support you there. So congratulations, and thanks for joining me.
As our people say, next year in Jerusalem.
Fabulous. So my guest today has been David Nayfeld. He is the executive chef and co-owner of Fico and Fico Alimentari in San Francisco. His new podcast is The Main Ingredient. His website is Cafico.com. That's CHEFICO.com. And The Main Ingredient, it's on, I believe, all different podcast platforms. Is that right, David?
Yes, everywhere where you listen to your podcast. And please go on Apple Podcasts and rate us 5 stars and leave a comment and subscribe.
Yes, do that. And do that for all in the industry too while you're at it. On social media, you can follow David at David Nayfeld, at Cafico, and at Cafico Alimentari. And you can follow me at Sherry Bayer, at Bayer PR, and at All Industry. My Facebook page is All in the Industry. My websites are BayerPublicRelations.com and SherryBayer.com and AllInTheIndustry.com. All of our shows are archived at heritageradionetwork.org. We are also on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Thanks to my engineer today, Amanda Wang. Thanks again to David and his wonderful publicist, Susan Hosmer. I'm Sherry Bayer. Till next week, be safe, be well, and thank you for being part of All in the Industry. Bye.
All in the Industry is powered by Simplecast. I'm Sherry Bayer, and you're listening to Heritage Radio Network, a member-supported podcast network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. This year, HRN is celebrating 10 years of food radio. For the past decade, we've been taking you behind the scenes of farms, restaurants, breweries, school cafeterias, and more. It's been 10 years, and we're just getting started. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.